This is Brett Snodgrass with another episode of the Iron Deep podcast. Today I have Dr. Roger Parrott, PhD, the president of Belhaven University from Jackson, Mississippi, who's written a book, Opportunity Leadership, Stop Planning and Start Getting Results. Let's go. Hey, what's going on? This is Brett Snodgrass with another episode of the Iron Deep podcast. And I got Dr. Roger Parrott, PhD, president of Belhaven University from Jackson, Mississippi, on with me today. What's going on, Roger?
Well, I'm glad to be with you. I've heard a lot of great things about this podcast, so what a treat to be on with you. Thank you.
Yes, well, no problem, man. I super excited to interview you, to hear about your wisdom. Want to just kind of read over who is Dr. Roger Parrott. So number one, he is the president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi. It's one of the fastest growing and most innovative colleges, serving about 5,000 students, including an online campus in China, which is pretty awesome. Belhaven was named one of America's best colleges to work for in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And he was also named the 10 most visionary educator leaders of 2021 by Education Magazine. And that just kind of scratches the surface. You're also a speaker and author. You've written a book that we're going to talk about today called Opportunity Leadership, which says stop planning and start getting results. So that sounds really interesting, Roger. Stop planning. So maybe.
Yeah, it's a little radical.
Yeah. No, man. Well, before we just dive into that, because it is such a counterintuitive book on leadership, let's just talk about you, man. Let's talk about your journey, your life. Like, who is Dr. Roger Parrott?
Yeah, well, I grew up in the home of a pastor and a college president, and God has blessed me to bring me close into fellowship with him from early days. So I don't have any great story of, how I rebelled and was horrible and came back to the Lord. So it's been obviously never a straight line of success, but God's been good to us, and to my wife, Mary Lou, and I, we have two great kids and homeschooled them both. All the way through till they got to college, and then they went to the college where I was president. And so it all worked pretty well for us. And, I've been university president for 34 years and love it every day. It's the best job in the world. You get to be with bright, young, energetic, idealistic young people and some really smart faculty, and you get to run a little city of your own, and you own your own football team. So it doesn't get any better than that.
That is cool. And it's awesome to have Christian school owning your own football team, number one, because I went to Huntington University in Northern Indiana. And at that time, which we still don't have a football team. So that's pretty cool.
Football's been fun. We just celebrated 25 years of football. So it's been a good change for us and a good thing. Belhaven's a unique place and a wonderful place. And we do a lot of creative, different things. One thing we got going right now is all of our students who come, we give them a free master's. And I just love doing this because I think the challenge for students in the future is so complex. The broader their education, the better off they're going to be. And so we do that. We give them a double major for free. A lot of unique things, but these are different days for higher ed than when you were at Huntington and when I was in school, and especially for Christian universities, we've got to help equip young people for the future and to really be well prepared.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, we could probably just go down the trail of just education today, where it's going. I mean, I have kids in school, public education, and we're starting down to that. You're obviously in the university and college, but we could go down that trail. But really, I want to just go down and talk about your book, Opportunity Leadership. You are a leader. You were born into a leadership home. I think your family was leaders. You're raising up leaders in college. And you've written this book, which I wanted to start off with this number one question is you're in a college, and one of the things we're preparing and planning for the future. So bright minds coming in, they're preparing their life for the future, planning, and I know I was in business, so we talked about business planning and creating a plan. But your book kind of starts off with the subtitle is Stop Planning. So I want to just talk about this.
Yeah.
Give us a little take on that, man.
Well, and it's not a new model of leadership. I will warn you right up front. It's a biblical model of leadership, which I think we've gotten away from because in the church and in Christian leadership, we have gotten so enamored with the models of Harvard Business Review and the consultants of business that we have adopted their view of strategic planning, long-range planning, whatever you want to call it. I call it destination planning. That's the easiest way to describe it for me. If you're trying to predict the future, that's what I'm calling Christian leaders to back away from, to let go of that and instead capture God's future. And that's very different from operational planning, where you're using the best out of what you've already been given. But this whole idea of trying to predict the future, it just doesn't work. I mean, that's the first thing. Anybody who had a plan 5 years ago doesn't have one now, because nobody had COVID in their plan. So that's the softball illustration. But more importantly than that, it is that we are missing God's best because we get focused on a plan. We sit around conference tables. We plan in the next 5 years, we're going to do this. We're going to grow this way. We're going to add this. We're going to do this. We get so focused on those objectives that we think we're doing for God's best, which we well-intended are, but we miss the ministry opportunities that he brings us because we're not even looking for them. Instead, I'm suggesting and calling in the book and giving some real handles for how you do this, to walk away from that kind of long-range planning and really trust God for opportunities. So, I've been, again, in higher education a long time, 20 years, on the formal planning side, the doing the planning like everybody else, the 5 or 10 year goals, the sub goals, all that stuff. I've done all that. It doesn't work. The last 20 years, I have gone without a plan. And God has done so much more than we ever could have done if we had a plan. So if you come to bellhavenuniversity.com and our website, the EDU, you won't find a long-range plan. It does not exist. There is no Bellhaven 2030 plan with 5 goals and it says we're going to do this and that. Instead, we really trust God for opportunities. And you mentioned we have a campus in China. It's not just a campus. We have a DBA program with teamed with a number 1 ranked school in China. Here's a Christian college team with Tsinghua University, which is the Harvard of China. And you can't plan that. God brings opportunities when you're available, when you're watching for them, when you're looking for them. So that's what I'm encouraging leaders to do. And it works in the church. It works in universities. It works in business leadership settings. So one of the endorsers of the book was Jim Morgan, who's the guy who turned around Krispy Kreme when it was about to go bankrupt. And Jim read the book and he said, this is exactly what we did at Krispy Kreme. We didn't have a plan. We were just looking for how we could find opportunities to turn this thing around, because Jim's a very godly guy and trusted God for that. So this thing really does work. And it's kind of remarkable how freeing it is. Single best decision I've ever made in all my years of leadership was to give up long-range planning.
Wow. I have a lot of questions with that, because you're exactly right. I've been in the business world. I have the 1-page plan. We have the 10-year, 30-year plan mixed with the 5-year, mixed with the 3, mixed with the 90-day rocks, all that stuff, right? I mean, we kind of go through that. It's kind of freeing when you're just talking. I'm like, man, how freeing that is to go without a plan. Now, again, it's counterintuitive. So I want to ask this question, because you actually have a part in the book that talks about how do you lead without a plan? I mean, we're talking to a lot of business leaders out there, or people in ministry, pastors, leaders in their families. How do you lead without a plan? I mean, what does that even look like for you, especially one leading faculty, staff, students?
Exactly, because there are a lot of expectations. That's what leaders do. You bring a plan, and
what do you talk about at your conference meetings?
You come out of some retreat where God speaks like Moses on the mountain, and you come down with 10 goals for the next 10 years, and that's how we know you're a leader. And that's what part of why leaders are afraid to do this, because if you give that up, what am I going to do as a leader? Right. What's my role? What's my responsibility? And so I want to answer your question, but before I do, I just want to differentiate so everybody understands that I'm talking about the difference between long-range planning and operational planning. Operational planning to me is good stewardship. So we know we're going to teach English. We're going to feed students at Diamond Commons. We're going to play football. We're going to get the best out of what we know God's has already given to us, but we're not going to put 1 ounce of energy in projecting where God is going to take us. So that's what I'm talking about. So how you lead with that is that your focus changes. You've got to change the culture. First of all, you got to change the expectations. And I encourage in the book, and in fact, I wrote kind of a fictional account of a leader who just changes this overnight and he gets fired, because you're going to get fired if you do this overnight. I can guarantee you, it's not going to work. People are going to be scared to death because they're expecting the plan is our security blanket. Right. So they've got to have an understanding of what the vision is, what the message is, what replaces it, and how that works. And after doing this for 20 years, I mean, I've got a campus who never even asks the question what the long-range plan is, because they're so accustomed to the culture we've built to adapt to quick change, to move rapidly, to adjust after we get something in place, all the kind of characteristics it takes to really lead in an entrepreneurial kind of way.
Yeah.
But that culture change is a process, and you've got to bring people on board. You got to change the way they look, what they're rewarded for, what they're encouraged for, all that. But it begins to me with a theology. You either trust God for the future or you don't. You can't have it both ways. God doesn't throw us the keys to the car and say, well, you drive and I'll point you the right direction and I'll see you when we get there. Yeah. No, God is sovereign in everything. We all believe it and we teach it and we believe it, but we don't in leadership often act that way. Sometimes we act like we've got to find that direction. And again, I said freeing, and you reiterated it is the most freeing thing I've ever done. It is remarkable. The freedom I feel. I mean, to come through COVID without a plan. I was not under the tension my peers were under. To come through the threat of recession without a plan, the dramatic changes that are on the horizon for higher education right now. God's got a plan. God's got a way, and we'll get there in his way and his direction if we'll be sensitive to the opportunities. But God's opportunities come like a very gentle breeze, and if you're not attuned to them, you're not going to feel it. You're not going to respond to it. You're just going to be focused on your plan to get where you want to go.
No, I love that. I love that. The direction I want to ask you is just kind of like you talked about, finding God's opportunities. What's that process kind of look like for you? Or maybe talk about what are some of the opportunities that God's brought to you that maybe you didn't plan for, but now you're like, whoa, I see God in this. I see this opportunity. And then you have to embrace the speed, right? You talk about taking risk and going after that opportunity, even though it wasn't in your plan, because a lot of times we hold back, like, no, we're not going to do that because our plan's over here. So how has God showed you your opportunities, and what's that process look like for you and your university?
It's fun to live out, for one thing, because you're just in a whole different mindset. Christian leaders tend to be way too slow. We are afraid to death we're going to make a mistake. We're afraid we're not going to be able to predict every contingency of every problem that could happen. And so by the time we got it all analyzed and all sorted out and all figured out, the opportunity's gone. We missed the moment. Yeah. And so we have really learned to operate with speed, and we've learned to adjust as we get into things and not predict. I always tell the campus, what we start with is not going to be what we end with. It's going to look different. And to get that culture built up. So I'll give you an example. We had an opportunity to go to China, since you mentioned China, about 6 years ago with an MBA. And we had been into this culture of opportunity leadership for quite some time. So my campus was comfortable with it. I got a phone call on the 1st of July of this opportunity in China. And on the 1st of August, we signed the contract. The 1st of September, we enrolled, we started writing the curriculum. 1st of October, we enrolled the first students. 4 months from start to actual enrollment. Now, most colleges can't figure out what color to paint the hallway in 4 months.
That's true.
And so, it was very rapid. Well, we did that. We were doing great in China. We had about 500 MBA students and the thing was rocking along great. And then COVID hit and China got locked down and they couldn't recruit. Well, the program kind of went down. The partner we were with in China kind of gave up on that side of the business, and that's fine. And so we kind of were trailing off in China. And I got a phone call about a year or so, I guess coming up on 2 years in the 1st of November. And it was from a friend in China who had a partnership that they had been trying to do with a major flagship university, a top ranked, if I told you the name, you'd know it. It's a top ranked state university. They've been trying for 2 years to get this doctorate of business administration going. The school couldn't make it happen. They couldn't move the dial to get it done. They talked to me the 1st of November and they said, would you be open to this? And I said, yeah, let me get my team. We'll do a Zoom next week. We did. And that was on a Monday. I said, we got a few questions. We got back to them, I think, on Friday, and we said, yeah, we'll go. And we were ready to go with a doctorate of business administration in China, teaching in Mandarin. It's all online. And so, but to take that story a little further, yeah, we went fast to get it started, but we were about a month into getting ready to roll, and we over Christmas, and we were going to enroll the first students mid-January. And the Chinese were pushing, they wanted their students to take 2 courses at a time. And 2 courses at a time at a doctoral level is really, really, really tough. And so my team was kind of pushing back. We let them do it, the MBA. But the doctorate, that's a different thing. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to kind of pause and figure that out first. And I said, if we pause this, we're not going to get the deal. It's going to go away. Mm-hmm. I said, let's start and we'll work it out after we get into it. We weren't 3 weeks into offering courses and they were raising their hands saying, please take 1 at a time and not 2. Mm-hmm. And it worked out. But so often we try to work all those contingencies out ahead of time. We never get going.
That's true.
So I'm encouraging, jump in, get going, and then learn to flex as you move along. And I've got a whole chapter on flexing with implementation, because that's where we miss a lot of it. Because again, leaders don't want to stand up and say, we're going to do X, and then it doesn't look like that. Yeah. We feel like somehow it makes us look bad. You got to change the culture so people understand that's okay. In fact, that's a good thing when it changes.
Yeah. No, I love that. And like you just mentioned, you had this whole chapter on flexing for implementation. And you mentioned just an example there. I think for leaders, it's hard we have this vision, especially for visionaries. We have this vision, we're going down this road, and it's hard for us sometimes to shift. And that's one example where you've shifted, but as a lot of it is just from you start something, you jump right in, and then just from the feedback of the people you're working with, some of your clients, has that been, for an example, like I said, I mentioned I started this men's ministry, Iron Deep. This podcast was called Iron Deep. We've had a couple of men's ministries, and I've had some vision here and there, but a lot of times it's starting to look maybe not like what I had planned. I'm trying to get some feedback and say, hey, what are their needs? Like, what do they really want? What's God want, obviously? And I'm just trying to figure that out. So again, I'm kind of in this murky, I know what I want, and but I'm kind of in this murky water too. Like I'm just trying to go down which direction to go. So talk to us about pivoting and flexing.
And I think, Brett, you build on your gifts. What are you good at? What's your expertise? What are you strongest at? But then you hold it lightly, and then let the feedback come, let the change come, let God mold and make that. He's not going to take it out of your gift strike zone. What you're good at is what he's going to continue to use you for. That's how he created you. That's how he gifted you. So of course he's going to build that into you. But I think we hold things too tightly. And part of it is, as leaders, we think that's our value added to come in with the finished product. Here it is. And I'm the leader. I had greater insights than the rest of you. And so here's how we're going to do it. And that's where leaders get in trouble. Yeah. And when we can hold things tight, loosely in our hands, it doesn't mean we don't care. And it doesn't mean we're not worried about the future in the way that we want it to be the best, but we're not worried how God's going to get us there. There's a lot of different paths to a great future. God will get us there. And that's where the joy of this comes, because it can often come through things that are so overwhelming that we know only God could do it. Only God could do it. One of the chapters I wrote in the book was called Learning to Love Roadblocks. And I think especially for entrepreneurs, man, they hit a roadblock and they're just going to plow in. They're just going to go harder and they're going to beat their head against the roadblock because I'm going to go through this thing no matter what.
Yeah.
And, God uses roadblocks sometimes to speak great wisdom to us. And sometimes, especially for a lot of us who are pretty well driven, the only time he can get our attention is when a roadblock comes up. And so when those roadblocks come up, we need to be asking, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to teach me? How are you trying to shape this? How are you trying to make it different? Rather than just plow through to achieve that predetermined goal. Yeah. And I think that's one of those ways as whether you're doing a podcast, run the university or you're working real estate, whatever it may be, when those roadblocks come, those are some of our most decisive moments to really hear God speak and direct.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Because I'm for one, I try to plow against the roadblock and instead of flexing and pivoting. You got a chapter in your book. It talks about practicing future focused evaluation. And I want to just talk about that because, again, I'm a visionary. I like ideas. I'm not very good at implementing ideas, but I have a lot of ideas. But a lot of driven entrepreneurs, they're always future focused, right? So they're thinking about the future. What are we going to do in the future? But typically that does come with a plan. So for you, maybe letting God kind of work. And do you have kind of a future focus? Or is it more of just, we're going to live in the present, just seeing what we're going to be doing right now and just thinking about today or next week? But talk to us about future focused versus present versus past.
Yeah. The chapter's probably a little bit more about how to personally evaluate employees and that kind of thing, focusing on their future rather than beating them up for the past. So that's kind of a little bit different thing. But essentially how we do it is we say yes until we have to say no. So we get lots of opportunities. We get people who bring us stuff all the time, faculty who come up with stuff, staff members who come up with stuff. Because we've got a culture of looking for opportunities, people bring things forward and they don't always come from me. And that's good. So we say yes until we have to say no. And eventually we may get to a point we have to say no, but we're trying to explore a lot of different things. And I give you a sample. Before COVID, when things were really going gangbusters, and of course everything kind of closed down for COVID, but before COVID, I think we had 14 or so different projects on a big board in my conference room we were working with. And I think by the time we got done through a year and a half of process, I think 3 of those actually implemented. That's okay. Sometimes we feel like in the church, well, God told me to do this and I got to do this. And so, we press it through even when it doesn't stand up to a good idea. Yeah. Good ideas do stand up to the light of day of scrutiny. And, but when we get to those points, we'll tend to just keep going and it doesn't always make sense. So we say yes till we have to say no. We're expectant about the future rather than cautious. We tend to be focused on our mission and our strengths, not our structures and our history. Again, risk of failure is a big one. It's very tolerable for us. And for a lot of leaders, it's embarrassing. If you don't deal with that one, you're never going to be able to capture God's opportunities because they're not all going to work out.
Yeah.
You're going to have things that come and bubble up and you've just got to be responsive. The model we use on our campus, if you ask people on my campus about opportunity leadership, they probably won't know much about it. But if you ask them about powerboats and sailboats, they'll all know that model. And the idea is we want to be a sailboat prepared to catch the wind of God and go wherever God's wind takes us, than a powerboat that goes where we think God wants us to go and ignores the wind. And we in the church and Christian business leaders have gotten pretty good at building some impressive powerboats that can go where we think God wants us to go and completely ignore the wind. And in doing so, we're ignoring God's opportunities. So that's kind of the model we use. And that kind of sensitivity does bring you into some things. There are lots of false starts, and that's okay. That's okay. God's no is as good as God's yes. When God says yes, we all celebrate and say, oh, isn't God good? Isn't God wonderful? God says no, we don't respond the same way, but God's no is just as good as God's yes, because all we want is what he wants for us. Yeah. He knows what's best for us. Why would he get us into something? So when we get no, I always remind my team, God's either preparing or protecting, one of the two. He's either protecting us from something that is the thing we shouldn't get into, or he's teaching us through this and preparing us for something else that's going to be coming.
I love that. And you're exactly right. I mean, a lot of times I think one of the biggest fears that I work with a lot of men is the fear of failure. So you talk about you got these 13 projects and only 3 of them kind of worked out. And a lot of times in our minds, we focus on, oh man, I'm a failure because I failed at these other 10 projects, right? So that's definitely out there. So Dr. Roger, as we kind of just wrap up this show again, want to make this just kind of practical. Like someone's listening to this show, they're saying, yes, okay, that's great. Oh, I've been maybe doing it all wrong. I've had the long-term planning. I got my vision board that everyone talks about, my dreams, all my vision of what I want. And I look at it every single day and I read it every day of my vision. Can you talk to them about how do they slowly start to shift into being a sailboat versus a powerboat?
Yeah. I get the question often. Well, I guess people don't always know what to ask college presidents. So they say, well, what's the university going to look like 10 years from now? And my transparent answer is, I don't know. I do not know. I don't know if we'll have more students or less. I don't know if we'll different programs or better or what it will be. But here's what I do know. That the best plan we can come up with around conference tables written out on whiteboards is pale in comparison to the plan that God has for us. So we want God's plan. So, I think in answer to the question, we have got to help our core constituency, the people we work closely with, think differently about that future. Again, plan well what you've been given. That's good stewardship. But planning a future that you can't predict, especially in this world, which is so unpredictable right now and is going to be for quite some time to come, trust God for that. It's a theological decision. It's an outlook. It's a culture. It's a mindset. It's not it's not a 1, 2, 3 how to do. I do offer in the book some process for how you bring this along. Start with your first adopters, et cetera, et cetera. Share a lot about what you're doing, and it takes a while. You don't do this overnight. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. But to have this freedom to really capture God's opportunities rather than being focused on our plan is such a wonderful way to live. And part of it is because I've never in my life seen a long-range plan which is not simply a list of things we wish we had that we don't have. Where opportunity leadership is focused on rejoicing in God's blessings he has given us and be thankful for those and be open to how he wants to use those going forward. And so when we get focused on all the good strengths we have and the positives going on, rather than on everything we don't have that others have and we wish we have, it does change the culture as well. And it frees up people to be creative. It frees them up to be entrepreneurial in their spirit. It frees them up to use their gifts and how God designed them. And, that's all we want is to achieve what God designed us to be. And that's really to get free from this grip of feeling like we've got to do this long range plan. I have had so many leaders tell me, I read the book and it changed me because this is what I've been wanting to do, but you gave me permission to do it. And, I had a pastor who just wrote yesterday, said he just came back from sabbatical. He said, this has transformed how I think about the future of my church. And he's got a huge, gigantic church. Wow. Because now I've got a freedom in this. A college president called and say, he said, I stayed up all night reading your book because I was so embarrassed about how I didn't have a plan. And now I've got a reason for it. That's what I'm talking about. And that's what I've been doing. And, I've been at it long enough and I don't need another job that I can just put it out there pretty bluntly about how it works and what it does. And it's really been a joy to share it with a lot of leaders.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us and our listening audience at the Iron Deep podcast today, Dr. Roger Parrott. I appreciate you. Love what you're doing. God has a huge plan for you and the university. So thank you so much. I know that we have the Opportunity Leadership book. You've also written another book as well, and you talked about it before the show. You mind sharing that?
I've got another book. It's called The Long View, Lasting Strategies for Rising Leaders. And thankfully, it just went out of print, so I can give it away. So if you're interested in it, the website is Go Belhaven with one L, Go Belhaven, BELHAVEN.com/book. And there you can download the book for free to your Kindle. And I've also got a 5-part series on the real cost of higher education, which may be helpful if you got college kids coming up in understanding how to manage the cost of what higher education has become.
Amen. Amen. Well, we're going to put that in our show notes too. You can check that out on our YouTube channel, The Iron Deep, or check it out on our website, irondeep.com. We have a blog with this particular episode with Dr. Roger Parrott. So thank you so much, Doctor, and God bless you.
What a treat. Thanks for letting me share with you today.